Welcome to the Focus and Chill podcast, where we discuss productivity tactics that work for neurodiverse individuals.
Every episode, we interview guests with lived experience of neurodiversity who also have a solid productivity and habit game, and pass the learnings on to you, our wise and benevolent audience.
We're your hosts, Jeremy and Joey.
I'm Joey, and I coach creatives to get moving on their most ambitious projects through the power of solid habits and strong focus. I'm also a perpetual student of psychology and perpetually on a quest to a one-armed chin-up.
And I'm Jeremy. I'm a neurodiverse software developer turned startup founder building habit and focus software for people with ADHD. My cool party trick is leaving parties early so I get to sleep on time to do my 3-hour-long morning routine. The Focus and Chill podcast is brought to you by FocusBear, a habit and productivity app that makes healthy habits and deep work the path of least resistance. If you have a tendency to check emails or scroll through Instagram first thing in the morning, but long to develop a meditation and exercise habit first thing, FocusBear can help you. The app blocks distractions on all your devices and guides you through your habits one at a time. Throughout the day, FocusBear assists you to stay in deep work by blocking websites and apps that are unrelated to your chosen focus mode. Life's not all about work though. You'll be prompted to take regular breaks to rest your eyes and stretch your muscles. At the end of the day, FocusBear helps you switch off. Work-related apps get hidden so you can unwind and sleep well. Check out the app by going to focusbear.io. Welcome to episode number 25 of the Focus and Chill podcast. We're thrilled to be joined by Professor Claudia Vickers today, an esteemed expert in metabolic engineering and synthetic biology. With a strong track record in science excellence and securing competitive funding, Claudia focuses on using microbes to provide valuable substances for industries. Professor Vickers has held influential positions in various organizations and even served as the inaugural director for CSIRO's synthetic biology group. Her expertise and leadership continue to drive scientific innovation, making a positive impact on both people and the planet. Welcome to the show, Claudia.
Thanks very much, Jeremy. Pleasure to be here.
So to start off with, could you tell us about your experience with neurodiversity? When did you realize you weren't neurotypical? What challenges have you faced and what solutions have you used?
So I guess I come from a fairly diverse family that people recognised early on was a bit different, which when we were growing up was kind of wonderful because everybody wanted to hang out at our place because our parents were less strict than other parents, I guess. And I think from fairly early on, I didn't feel like a normal person, felt there was something a little bit different. And then I have 2 children who have been diagnosed with ADHD. And because I'm a research scientist, I sort of went, right, and went off and found out about this thing called ADHD and realised that it was very strongly genetic. And I connected the dots pretty quickly after I was familiar with all the different, I guess, characteristics of an ADHDer and went, that's probably me too. So, although I haven't got a formal diagnosis and I'm thinking of going to get a formal diagnosis, I'm fairly confident that with my 2 ADHD kids, I probably have ADHD myself.
Yeah, because it's something like 75% heritable.
That's right. Yeah, more for men than for women apparently, but looking at our family, I'm probably the one.
Yep. Your partner isn't quite the same?
No, he's a lot. Fortunately, he's the more solid and steady foil to my impulsive ADHD part of the partnership.
So are you the fun parent who's less strict?
I'm definitely less strict. Yeah, the kids have definitely made it clear that they think I'm less strict. So I could probably claim to that, yeah.
And I imagine there's a lot of positive aspects of having ADHD as well in terms of you're a scientist and a lot of your work probably involves a lot of, not quite intuition, but creative insight. Do you feel like that's part of it and maybe the number of projects that you've been involved in?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a couple of powerful ADHD traits, which in my case have been both a superpower and, obviously there's downsides of that as well. So the first one is hyperfocus, very, very strong streak of hyperfocus, which comes out in many different ways. And it's actually something that's almost needed in many ways to get through the higher degree education system. Another one is the ability to juggle multiple threads of thought at one time. And from that, you are actually able to draw conclusions or identify patterns. So pattern recognition is another one as well, that other people don't necessarily do. And that sounds like intuition and gut feeling, but it's actually just connecting dots and identifying patterns in data sets, in information, and drawing conclusions and just seeing things other people don't necessarily see. And creativity comes from that. And also creativity is a really important part of being a research scientist, I think. And that ability to recognize patterns and identify novel findings and such forth.
Yeah, absolutely. In terms of hyperfocus, people often say that it's both a strength and a weakness. Do you ever have challenges with, like, for example, for me, I often burn food because I'm hyperfocusing on my work and then I forget about the cooking that I was doing. Do you have any downsides of hyperfocus?
Yeah, all of those things. I'm a lot better now than I used to be because I have to be, because I've got to balance things with the needs of my kids and my relationship and such forth. But when I can and when I could more in the past, I'd just be down the rabbit hole for days and days at a time. Less so to the exclusion of food, although I definitely get very hungry before I went, oh, hang on, yeah, I do have to feed my body and go do something. But certainly to the exclusion of work-life balance and exercise and all that sort of stuff. So there's a big downside of it. And certainly I was able to indulge being severely hyper-focusing at the time when I was doing my PhD. So they're definitely downsides. The downside of being able to hold many threads of thought in your mind at one time is that it's very difficult to do just one thing at a time. So Zooms, for example, are just terrible for me because there's only one thing going on. If I'm not the one who's talking, then it's really hard to maintain focus and not get distracted. And I've found that fidget toys are really important to keep my fingers busy, just busy enough to stop my hand going to the mouse to open the email, something like that, to run along in parallel.
And you mentioned that you've also got a little walking treadmill under the desk as well.
Yeah, that's been fantastic actually, because that helps with the exercise balance. And I can get sort of 5 or 10 kilometers out easily in a day through a couple of meetings while I'm going on that. That's been revolutionary.
And that's incredible, 10 kilometers.
Yeah. It's easy when you're just walking at a reasonable, medium pace, so fast enough that you're not out of breath. And I mean, you're kind of moving around a little bit and people find that a bit weird until they get used to it. And I'm a bit hardcore. It's just like, okay, you're going to have to get used to it because this works for me. But it's really, it's actually not hard to go 10 kilometers through a couple of meetings.
Yeah, if they're hours on end.
Yeah.
How about, one thing I'm dying to know is, my biggest challenge when I was doing my honours in biochemistry was remembering to look after the cell culture. That I'd put E. coli onto a shaker and then I'd forget about it, and I ruined multiple experiments. How do you go with lab work? Do you have strategies around being able to actually look after those kind of experiments, which often, it seemed to me like they don't necessarily require that much focus, that focus when you're setting them up, but then after that you have to do some waiting?
Yeah, timers and alarms. And they're really important for me in all sorts of things because I have that classical time blindness. I'm very poor at estimating how long a given thing will take to complete. So what I do nowadays is just estimate it and then just double that. And usually that's not quite enough or approaching enough, but closer to the mark than the original estimation. But timers on my alarm constantly going off. I remember when I was doing when was that? It must have been my honours degree. I was working in transgenic sugarcane. And I remember collecting all the timers from around the lab and putting them onto my and then, of course, you had so many going at the time. Then when one went off, you had to go, oh, shit, what was I actually supposed to be doing on that? Whereas, of course, on a smartphone now, which they didn't exist then, it's fantastic because you just write yourself a little note and set a timer, or you tell Siri to set a timer and give it a name. So it's really great.
Yeah, I really like the experience of using a voice-activated timer, because for some reason I could never get into actually one of those lab timers. I saw other people using them, but I'd always forget to actually turn it on. but it seems much more intuitive to say, hey Siri, or I've got it on my watch and I'll just set the timer that way. Seems to work really well.
I agree completely. If I had to actually go in and write something down and set a timer, that wouldn't work, because that would take me away too much from what I was focusing on. But if I just say the thing that's in my head, and I often do a lot of long car drives because I've got, aging parents in cities that are an hour or two away. And I think a lot and send myself a lot of emails and a lot of reminders during that time as well.
Love it. So let's talk now about the work projects that you're focusing on at the moment.
Yeah. So you've caught me at a really interesting time where I'm actually taking a pause for the first time in my working career, and I'm not working formally for anyone. I'm doing that pause to think very carefully and deliberately about how I'm going to have impact with my science in the next decade, particularly with respect to climate change, so carbon sequestration or carbon emissions reduction. I think that we're at a bit of a pivot point where it's really necessary for people to not be distracted by the minutiae of everyday life and to really think carefully about what we can do to deal with this threat, which is no longer existential. So it's a really interesting and exciting time in my life. And I'm actually very grateful for the opportunity to do that, because you don't get to do it very often. So for the last 18 months or so, I've been working in startup companies, and it's been really fantastic. And I've learned an enormous amount. Prior to that, as you mentioned in the introduction, I was with CSIRO for 5 years as director of the synthetic biology program, and I've been an academic prior to and overlapping with CSIRO for about sort of 15, 20 years or so. And so I've worked in academia, government and industry, and I've done a lot of consultancy for industry as well. So fairly, broad range of experience and expertise. But right now I feel like, as I said, I've got 2 small kids and I want to do something that makes the world a better place for them in the future. And so I'm picking out the things that I can work on in synthetic biology that can actually deliver proper impact within a decadal time frame.
That's a critical point there in terms of how fast the impact can happen, because I guess there's been a lot of promise around being able to make, say, plastic-eating microbes and synthetic rubisco that could be a lot more efficient at pulling carbon out of the air. What's your pick on where synthetic biology or the type of work that you're doing could most help with climate change?
Yes. So first, it's probably important to explain what is synthetic biology, because not everybody across that. So synthetic biology is basically using DNA to encode essentially machines, so DNA encoded machines that do jobs inside the cell. And it's very much like using DNA as a software that you can recode for specific applications. And in my particular case, I use it to recode the metabolism of the cell and channel carbon as it goes into the cell along different metabolic pathways, so it comes out as industrially useful compounds that might be fragrances or flavors or food ingredients or industrial polymers or rubbers or plastic replacements, biodegradable products or aviation fuel, a whole host of different things, even pharmaceuticals and things like that. And we can make all these different things, and there's a lot of other things you can do with synthetic biology, but we can make all these different products, and according to techno-economic evaluations, we should be able to make them at substantially lower carbon emissions, lower land use and lower water use than the incumbent technologies. So that's exciting for me. However, there aren't a lot of things that can really make an impact at scale. So for something to make an impact at scale, it has to be scalable and large and significant. And when you look at different products that you make, there's a relationship between the value of a product and the market size of a product and the cost it is to make that product. It's sort of like a 3-way scale, and that determines whether or not it's economically viable. So you kind of start there. Is it economically viable to do this? And if you push towards the products that are high volume and low value, which is where you need to be in order to get economic impact, then there's a sort of a sweet spot where you can get to some reasonable level of impact and it's economically viable. So biofuels are very, very difficult. An enormous amount of hype around that, enormous amount of hype around synthetic biology as there is with any emerging technology. And I kind of feel like we're through the massive peak and trough of the Gartner hype cycle, and we're on that sort of slope of enlightenment, traveling towards the plateau of productivity. Possibly not quite at the plateau yet, but we have a much better understanding of what's possible and what's not possible. And biofuels are an enormous challenge. There are 5 areas that I think that we can have impact with this kind of technology going forward. Most of them are in the emissions reduction space. So agriculture and food, about 25% of global greenhouse gas emissions. And there are a whole heap of different technologies that are coming online now and very soon in the future to decrease greenhouse gas emissions from the agricultural sector. The next one is utilisation of greenhouse gas emissions. So there's a company called LanzaTech that I'm really excited by. They use industrial waste gases as a carbon feedstock for gas fermenting microbes. And then they turn that carbon into industrially useful compounds. So I think that's exciting. Yeah.
Like a sewage treatment plant that might be emitting methane?
Yes. Yeah. So, methane's a fermentable carbon source. And so they use Clostridia, and they take those carbon monoxides and dioxides and methanes and things, and they strip them from the off gas stacks from heavy industry and feed those to the microbes in a fermentation reactor. Very bespoke and interesting design that they have for their reactors. And then the microbes convert those gases into industrial polymers that you can make fibers and plastics and all sorts of things from. So I think that's cool. Really, that's a New Zealand company that's moved to the US. They're based in Chicago now. There's a company, an Australian company, which is a spin out from ANU by Colin Jackson, and the company is called, I've forgotten the name. It'll come to me. They're doing, they have an enzymatic, a microbial enzymatic system, enzymatic system that breaks down plastic very, very rapidly. So you can get to an infinite plastic recycling system like you do with glass. I think that's really, really exciting technology. So waste recycling is going to be really important. And the the fourth area is in carbon sequestration. So biology already does this very effectively. We need to be able to speed that up. Rubisco, and generally improving photosynthesis, very, very difficult, enormous amounts of funding, and very, very smart people have been trying to work on that unsuccessfully, really, for a long time. And the problem there, I think, is that, there's an obvious problem that O2, oxygen, looks just like carbon dioxide. And the enzyme, I can't really differentiate between the two. So Rubisco is a carboxygenase oxygenase, and people forget that it has 2 functions. And the final area, which is an area that I think is really underdeveloped at the moment, is materials. So bio-based materials, in particular construction materials. So construction is responsible for 20% of greenhouse gas emissions. And if we can start converting to bio-based construction materials, then I think that would be really impactful.
Okay, so would that be making better cements that don't require...
Yeah. Cement and steel are the big problems. And the challenge there is a regulatory system. So unsurprisingly, the construction material regulatory system is very slow to change because, it takes 20 years to work out whether something's going to be a disaster or not. And it's just very conservative for good reasons. But we really need to convert from using Portland cement or OPC to using more sustainable construction materials. So there's a fair bit of work to be done in that space. And one of the things I'm doing in my thinking sabbatical at the moment is looking at bio-based alternatives for binders and more broadly for other construction materials.
Yeah, that sounds amazing. I'm glad that people like you are working on it.
Yeah, well, it's really exciting. And like I said, I've got the time to do this now, the luxury really to do this now, to think really carefully and sort of pivot and focus a bit more on more impactful things to do with my science. And like I said, that's an enormous privilege.
Cool. And how about when you're not working? What do you enjoy doing in your off time?
Chasing the dopamine man.
So you're skydiving?
No, I'm really bad at getting locked into scrolling on my phone. But when I'm not doing that, then I've taken up reading actual paper books again, which I used to do an enormous amount. And I'm being strict with myself and rediscovering the joy that there is in an actual real paper book in your hands. I've just finished Sam Neill's memoirs, and that was really excellent read, highly recommended. I spend a lot of time doing stuff with my kids. So now that I've got a bit more time on my hands, I'm helping to coach my son's soccer team and my daughter's touch football team. And that's really fun. The soccer team's particularly amusing and very wholesome. It's like, a flock of seagulls chasing a potato chip running around the field chasing the ball. It's very cute. It's a lot of fun, yeah. So with that stuff going on, you don't sort of have a lot of time for other things. But I do try to exercise. I try to get my 10,000 steps per day, and that's about it, really.
Sounds. I sometimes run near a soccer pitch with little kids playing, and that analogy is very fitting based on what I've seen. It does look like fun for both the parents and the kids.
Yeah.
Right. So now, in your mornings, how do you start your day? Do you have a consistent routine that you follow, or is it a bit more freeform?
Yeah, I'm not very good. I'm not very good at routines. And usually it's about just because we've got a neurodivergent household, it's really about getting out the door, getting the kids out the door. So we're fortunate that we have a nanny that comes in. She's really lovely. That helps sort of keep us to time and get the kids organised and the lunch boxes made and the teeth brushed and all those things that need to get done to manage things on the way out. I'm an adjunct professor at Queensland University of Technology and also at Griffith University. But at QUT, I've got a research program there and a team of people. So I get in there a couple of times a week and work from my office in there, and just make sure things are all on track and there to support the team. And that's usually sort of Mondays, Tuesdays and Fridays, or one of Monday or Tuesday and Fridays. But outside of that, I'll usually, we'll get the kids out the door, and sometimes I'll go into the school for a school assembly or something like that, and then I'll come home and start working. But it's fairly free flow. There's no very rigorous schedules, which is obviously bad because time can vanish very quickly when there's not a schedule going on.
Well, that's really interesting that you've got the time 3 days per week in the university, and that must in some ways provide some structure. How do you, because you've got other things that you're doing as well, it sounds like you've got the thinking time, and you mentioned that you're potentially doing some consulting as well. Can you tell us how you fit that all in the week?
Yeah, well, I'm actually working on a number of different things at the moment. I'm very careful to keep the non-university work separate from the university work so that I can manage a conflict of interest there. But I'm running 3 different activities at the moment. So there's a consulting company which is called Built Solutions, and there I'm doing consulting mostly for startup companies and helping them to operate a number of different areas, all the way from synthetic biology, metabolic engineering, biofoundry operations, through to international connections and policy development and things like that. And that's a lot of fun. It doesn't take up a huge amount of time, and I'm trying to keep that as a small business rather than let it sort of get carried away, because there's other things that I want to do as well. The other company that I'm starting at the moment with some old friends and colleagues, is a company that's writing a software package that uses artificial intelligence as a personal writing assistant to write scientific manuscripts. And that is primarily aimed at debottlenecking the process of publishing science. So I realized very early in my career that academia is very, very black and white in terms of metrics. It's basically manuscripts out, or publications out, and grants in. And for both of those things, you need to be able to write. But people aren't taught how to write properly, and most people are really not very good writers. And even though I'm a decent writer myself, I found out very quickly when I started managing students and research groups that it's not necessarily easy to teach people how to write properly. So I spent about a decade early on developing didactic techniques, teaching techniques to teach people how to write properly. And I developed that into what I usually run as a couple of days of residential workshop. And I'm converting that now to a software package that uses call-outs to artificial intelligence softwares to help write the sections of scientific manuscripts. And I think that will be really quite revolutionary and impactful in the science community, and I'm really excited about that. And the other thing I'm doing is a construction company, essentially. So it's bio-based materials for construction alternatives along the lines of what we talked about earlier. And I'm fairly excited about that and the potential there, but I'm focused at the moment on doing some due diligence and feasibility studies and make sure that there's a pathway to economic impact there.
They all sound amazing, especially the AI-powered academic writing assistant. I used to be, when I was at uni, I got a job as an academic editor, helping primarily researchers in Asia to be able to get their work published. And I could see what you were describing around the bottleneck there, and also just the danger of someone like me with no actual background in some of the research that I was editing. I can see how it's much better potentially if you have AI to do it so that the person can see where meaning has been distorted rather than giving it to someone else.
Yeah, and I think that's a huge market. In fact, some of the market research we've done has flagged that in Asia and China in particular, there's a real need for language support in places where there are people who don't have English as a first language. And I think that's going to be really important.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, we might fly through the remaining questions after we take a quick break. So we'll come back after you hear from our sponsor.
Hello there, this is Joey. I'm excited to tell you about a project I run where I help imaginative people just like you breathe life into their creative dreams, like writing that book or performing that stand-up comedy set. I know the first step can be daunting. I've been there many times and have helped many people on a similar journey. If you've wondered how to bring those ideas swimming around in your head to life, get in touch. We'll shrink the intimidating dragon of a goal into a cute little lizard of an achievable daily habit that you can do every day to get started and stay moving. Click on the link in the show description to get in touch.
Okay, and we're back and we're going to do a bit of a power round of our remaining questions. So firstly, ask, how do you optimize your productivity during your working hours? We heard about the walking treadmill. Do you have any other special tactics that you use?
Lists. So I'm really big on lists and a list with priorities in them. Unfortunately, the top priority isn't necessarily the one that I'm wanting to work on. I am a procrastinator, and I'll do the things that give me the little dopamine hits because they're quick and easy to achieve and challenging first before I go for the big stone in the cup. But I'm actually getting better at that, and I think it's been incredibly valuable to me actually to do all this research around ADHD and better understand my own little personality traits and how I can identify and address those. So I'm finding now that I understand better why I operate and how I operate and why I operate that way, that I can actually go, yep, I'm procrastinating. Right now, what I need to do is seize that big unpleasant thing and use the little things that give me lots of dopamine hits as a reward for the big dopamine hit that I'll get out of achieving the big piece of work that's more challenging and less rewarding or boring or something like that. So I think it's just so important to be introspective enough to understand why you're behaving the way you are, what drives your behavior, and start to use that as a motivator and as an advantage rather than a disadvantage.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's probably one of the things I've heard from a lot of people, that there's that advice of eat that frog, but I don't think it necessarily always works for people with ADHD. It sounds like you're describing almost like the momentum method, where you choose a few little tasks initially to get moving, and then after that you've got more executive functioning power to go and tackle the really nasty tasks.
Yes, very much so.
And you spoke a bit then about a habit you'd like to remove from your life in terms of potentially procrastination, and that approach there sounds really powerful. Is there anything else that maybe one that you've vanquished in the past? I think you were saying something around time blindness, that you've kind of gotten a lot better at it.
Yeah, I'm a lot better at it. I still wish it wasn't there. It doesn't seem to be vanquishable, the time blindness. So I do wish it would go. I do have mechanisms like blowing out my estimations to try to make it work a little bit better, and it helps. It does help a lot, but still I'm late a lot. And so what I do now is I just tell people, I've got time blindness. I'm really poor with time management. If I'm late, it's not because I'm disrespecting you. It's just because I've got distracted by something, and that's because I probably have ADHD. So when I go into collaborations now, and with my couple of friends who I could probably also tip them as being neurodivergent, who are working on the AI program with me at the moment, we just made this agreement. Yeah, we know we all behave like this. We know we've all got our little quirks. We're very direct. We tend to monologue, right? If I'm monologuing, then you just go ahead and do this little snip motion on the Zoom, and I've got it. That's cool. I know that you're where I am now, and I don't need to go through the next 5 minutes of explanation because you guys are all super smart and you're there already. So that helps a lot. I think that the important thing there out of that little story is communication and managing people's expectations, and that can be easy, especially if you have friends who are at a similar stage in life and have gone through a lot of similar things, possibly as a result of their own ways that they interact with the world. Sometimes people accept it, sometimes they don't. It depends on what their own little hang-ups and quirks are, or how mature they are and how they engage with the world as well. But I think that if you sort of go into it and you're just transparent and say, look, here are the things that I know are an issue about me. This is the reason, and it's going to be like that. So, be prepared. It might work, it might not work, but it's certainly, I found it paves the way for a better relationship anyway.
Yeah, definitely. I love that. I've had to do that with my colleagues as well, because I can sometimes be really brusque, and it's not that sometimes really scares people, or they feel like I hate them, and it's not about them. And now I've warned people and they don't mind it. It's something that I try to change, but it comes out sometimes.
Yeah, and the other thing I find is that I often, from operating with multiple threads running at once, I'll often get to a point in a few seconds of thought, and I'll start talking, and there'll be massive logical leaps in what I'm saying because everybody else hasn't been taken on that journey as well. And I've learned now to go, oh, hang on a sec, sorry, I've jumped ahead. Let me just go back, rewind a bit and talk you through my thought process so that you're on the same page as me.
And I love that, the snip thing, because it sounds like some people are able to make that leap with you, and other people, you have to bring them on the journey a little bit more. I'll have to try that too.
Yeah, absolutely. The other thing that I've found incredibly awesome and just discovered a few years ago is noise cancelling headphones. They're so good. I also realized I'm a bit, not all the time, but I'm a bit noise sensitive, especially when I'm hyper focusing on something. I can actually block things out very effectively. Apart from kids are very hard to block out. They're very persistent. But noise cancelling headphones, when you're feeling a bit agitated, or trying to focus on something, or walking through airports, which I do quite a lot of, they're just so good, and that feels like a life-changing thing for me, as well as the treadmill under the desk. They're just fantastic.
Fantastic. Well, I'm putting them into our list of resources. Final longer question: how do you switch off in the evening?
I don't. I'm not as good at that as I would like to be. And I often I need to be tired before I go to sleep. If I go to bed and I'm not tired or brain tired, then my mind will just start rolling through whatever it is that I've got to think about. I used to hyperfixate a lot, so stress and anxiety actually for ADHD people comes a lot from hyperfixating on particularly social things that might have gone wrong, or, you know, something that happened that you weren't comfortable with, or something that feels disastrous about work or whatever. And that leads you to catastrophize, and that's actually part of hyperfixation. And that's really easy to do, particularly at nighttime. Your brain is a lot more prone to hyperfixation and catastrophizing. So it used to be a lot more of a problem for me before I understood about how my brain worked and about how I in particular respond to, you know, issues in the workplace or things that put me under duress. And it's a lot less of a problem now, because I can now identify and go, oh, that's what the brain's doing. You know, hey, brain, calm down. It's cool. It's actually not that bad. Let's pull it apart and go, what's the worst thing that could happen? Oh, it's actually not that bad, you know? And so winding down at nighttime for me is better if I catch myself on the melatonin hit that happens. If you're going to bed fairly regularly at nighttime, then you tend to get tired regularly at nighttime. Again, I'm not a regular bedtime person, although I do often fall asleep with the kids quite early, like 9:30. Which is good, because then I wake up early and I have a couple of hours of very beautiful time to myself when the world is all still and quiet and is still waking up in the morning. So that's quite nice. But yeah, winding down, I don't have good wind down protocols, so I should probably have a look and see what you've got in your tool list.
It sounds like what you're doing there is perfect, because you're identifying when the catastrophizing happens. I can relate to that. That often happens to me as well. And I do preemptive journaling, but it sounds like you don't need to do that you're able to catch it, and you know what your brain is doing, and you don't let yourself go down that hyperfixation rabbit hole.
Yeah. And I think, again, that's like a learning, I think, of you know, having been fortunate enough to have two beautiful children with ADHD, with all their trials and tribulations, and, you know, learn myself from that process, because there's a lot of support you need to give for your kids who have ADHD.
Yeah, and wonderful that you're looking after yourself as well. I went to a conference recently, and one of the talks was the best way you can help your children is to identify your own ADHD as a parent.
Oh, yes. Like I could not agree more. It's really helped me a lot in managing my kids' behaviour, in teaching them and working with them, and giving me the space to give them space for what they need, in advocating for them in social environments in the school. Like, it's a really long journey, and it's a lot of heavy lifting working with kids who've got ADHD. And of course, it makes it that much harder when you've got your own ADHD and issues to manage as well.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to hopefully in the future becoming a parent, both the positive and the challenges. Yeah,
absolutely. And I think, like, you'll be really well positioned, I think, to be prepared should you end up with a kid who's carrying ADHD as well, or whatever it is.
Yeah, pretty likely. Okay, so final two questions. Where can people connect with you? Would LinkedIn be the best place, or?
Yep. So I'm on LinkedIn, easy to find, and I'm on Twitter at Claudia E. Vickers. And I'm gonna have a website up shortly with BioBuilt Solutions, but probably LinkedIn and Twitter for now.
Wonderful. And any final pieces of advice or any asks for the audience?
Yeah, life is special and wonderful. Don't let that hyperfocus mess you up too much. The hyperfocus is an incredible gift, but also it's that double-edged sword. And just know your own mind. Know how your brain works and how you interact with the world around you. The more you can learn about that, the easier life will be.
Love it. Thanks so much for coming on the show, Claudia.
You're very welcome. It was a pleasure.
Thanks for tuning into this episode of the Focus and Chill podcast. To listen to other episodes, jump onto podcast.focusbear.io. If you'd like to be a guest on the show, or you know someone who'd be a good fit, email us at team@focusbear.io. Otherwise, stay focused, stay chilled, and peace out.